All right, good morning and welcome. We are excited to have a wonderful discussion today and a useful discussion on how to weather the storm. For those of you that are tuning in, we have over 100 participants right now, and we'll keep track of it, probably over 150.
200.
We have over 200 now participants in this panel. This is obviously a unique format to us at Kiln. We're very much a physical company, and yet we're learning how to be a little less physical and a little more digital. So we're grateful for the time that has been given to us by Sid and Gavin and Ben. Before we start, I'll ask each of them to give an introduction and to mention, it would be helpful, I think, if you just mention how many companies are in your portfolio, because I think that will be useful context to those that are listening in. I do want to thank my team. We have a wonderful team that's been working behind the scenes to put this together. Brighton and Noah and Peyton and Annie have spent a lot of time to get this functioning well, so thank you. And welcome any members from Kiln as well as the broader community. This invite went out to about 23,000 people, and we expect that there's going to be a really good attendance to this call. So that being said, we'll start out. Gavin, if you'd like to give a quick introduction, then we'll go to Ben and Sid.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks for having me. I make sure my volume's on here. This is a real honor to be on this panel with these guys and to be addressing the audience during some really rocky times, but hopefully a time that is amazing for entrepreneurs to build great companies. So I'm Gavin Christensen. I'm the founder of Kickstart Seed Fund. We're currently investing out of our fifth fund. We have over 100 companies. You know, maybe 70% of those are in Utah. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. Ben?
Yeah, thanks as well for having me be a part of this and for organizing it. I think, you know, a lot of people at this point in time have a lot of questions about where things are headed. So I think the dialogue more than anything else is great. So Ben Capell, Petersen Ventures, we've invested in over 100 companies since we kicked off our venture investing in 2008. I'd say we have about 70 active portfolio companies now. And so lots of great conversations with those companies. Hopefully we can share some of those learnings today.
Great. Sid?
Thanks, Arian. Sid Krommenhoek, I'm a general partner at Album VC. I share the duties with two partners, John and Diogo, and we're on our third fund. We've made just over 50 investments, most of those in Utah and many, spanning New York to California.
Thank you. There are other players in the Utah VC market, but the three of you and your companies represent a significant number of companies here in Utah. And I think it'll also be helpful to hear your perspective on companies that may be outside of Utah and what they've been kind of encountering. So let's just start off with what is the context of most of the conversations you're having with your portfolio companies? And what are you focusing on? Where's your focus in those conversations? You can go at will. No order needed.
Yeah, so I maybe I'll kick this one off. So I think the focus of the conversation that we've had with our portfolio is really around. I think the message that we've provided is prepare for the worst and hope for the best is like the high level theme. And so as we've talked to companies, I think we've tried to recognize the reality. We don't really know what's going to happen in the coming months. We're starting to see some ideas of what could happen. So I think our base level recommendation and conversation with our portfolio is to project. We know that whatever plan we had in place going into the year is not the plan that we probably should have going forward. It's going to be different. The question is how different. And so we're actually encouraging our companies to, I guess the words I've used is sort of bottom out the plan and understand what is the downside scenario here, and be really realistic about and clear-minded about that, trying to be as unemotional about it as possible. And the reason for that is, one is that we found over the years that real innovation happens once within constraints, when people know the constraints they're operating under. And if we aren't realistic about those constraints, we're going to have a much harder time identifying the opportunities. But also, the main thing, and then the second point is the lesson we learn over and over: cash is king. And so be really realistic about your current cash situation, what your burn rate is, and doing sensitivity analysis around that to really make sure you have a sense for what the operating plan should be, and looking for key marks and milestones along the way, and being able to adjust to what we learn, because we're all in uncharted territory, and we're kind of learning as we go.
So Ben, you identified getting a clear handle on your constraints, milestones, and cash.
Yes.
Cool. Gavin, Sid.
Yeah, I can chime in. I think adding to that, the numbers we're looking at is planning for 24 months. We're saying, there's always this idea as you raise capital of, you're raising for, say, 12 to 18 months typically, but in the current state of things, to Ben's point, we are saying, like, what is the worst case scenario, and could we weather to the end of 2021, and how would we get there? And it's a hard exercise, but what we've found so far is that it will be difficult to get there, but by making that hard decision now, you stay ahead of it. And the scariest scenario isn't as scary. I don't want to minimize what that means to teams and cutting burn and how hard it is to get there, but we can do it. And all of the cliches and how we invest, where, founders with skin in the game, founders who have grit, people and teams who can slog through the mud when it's difficult, like, these things play out. Like, these are the times where in a special way, like, accountability is at an all-time high, and it's staring us in the face. And that brings with it a certain amount of adrenaline, excitement, rallying, some kind of arm in arm, in these companies as they approach what is their own worst case in the kind of macroeconomic, things outside of our control type of world we're in.
It's a great point.
Those are great thoughts. The only thing I would add on my side would be, I think that it's, on the opportunity side, it's important to recognize that the companies that figure this out and that are able to navigate this successfully are likely going to be the new titans of our ecosystem, just like they were last time. Just speaking a little bit autobiographically, I started Kickstart in 2008. And I thought I had like a $20 million fund nailed down and ready to rock, and ended up taking me like 2.5 years to raise $8 million, And there's the good news about Utah and this ecosystem is it's so much better than it was. The folks that are on the call are all actively deploying capital, and we're excited, all of us, to invest over the next 2 to 3 years. So things have changed, and we're not going to go back to 2008, right? I mean, there's capital, there's critical mass, there's so many good things going. And back then, it was like getting a $750K round done was like a heroic effort. It was personal calls to angels, right? So we're not going back there. However, you definitely should not underestimate what this is. And this is, I think to Sid's point, this is 2 to 3 years in my mind. But the fundamentals are there to really rally back. But there's nothing, this is sort of unprecedented. We've never seen something like this in the world, in the modern era. But, recognize the opportunities. If what I say is, hey, this is back to the core of Utah entrepreneurship: scrappiness, efficiency, strong product market fit. In a lot of ways, hopefully this helps you put distance between you and your competitors, because you understand this, because you've lived this. The kind of soft companies that rely on capital and bad unit economics, they're kind of toast in this environment.
Good. So let me ask, when you get a call from a CEO right now, how are you typically are you giving them a specific framework, or are you giving them a specific directive in terms of what you want to see coming back from them? What is it that most of those calls are ending with?
I can start on, what I would say is, and I'm sure this is true of the other investors, is the CEOs and founders we're backing largely have a plan in place and just want someone to talk through it with. And they're not this is why we've invested in these leaders. They're not underestimating the situation, but they're confident, and I would say it was, I think we're all taking this one day at a time. And one of the amazing things about people we invest in is they're all confident they're going to thrive in this environment, which is awesome. Like that's the entrepreneurial spirit. That's why you all on this call are special. But they want an ear to walk through. They want to making sure that, what are other companies doing? We're all in this together. We're all experiencing the same things. And so I would just say I've been more of a sounding board and, kind of say, hey, let's think about the fundraise. Let's think about, specifically what you're thinking. Maybe there are going to be, unfortunately, a number of layoffs. And so I think one things we can do as a community is rally around those companies. And there's been a war for talent here for a while, and there's going to be a lot of great talent available. And that's an opportunity for those that are able to keep growing in this environment.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, challenge is the genesis of innovation. And I think both Ben and Sid touched on this, that this is an opportunity to get back to what's the core of our product, how do we make it sustainable for the long run, how do we innovate and be creative in a unique time of challenge. So what do you think is Ben, Sid touched on 24 months. What do you think is the approach to capital that young companies should be taking right now? We know that cash is king, but what kind of response do you anticipate from the VC community, and for companies that may only have a 12-month runway, or that we're expecting to raise capital over the next 6 months? What advice would you be giving to those companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And reality is, through no fault of their own, these companies are finding themselves in a really tough position because this just happened to take place at this moment. So the advice I think we're providing to our portfolio is, I guess we're looking at our portfolio across a couple different metrics of risk. One of those is fundraising risk. So if you need to raise cash over the next 6 months, I think there's a few things to keep in mind. The good news is there's a lot of capital in the market today. So a lot of venture capital dollars have been raised by funds on the backs of really strong performance over the last couple of years and a really low interest rate environment. So there's capital out there. The second thing, though, is that I think all entrepreneurs need to be aware of is, and you can kind of get a sense from it from this call and this conversation, there's a lot of focus and energy around the portfolio right now. So trying to get a good sense for how is my portfolio doing? What is each company, what are the individual risks that they face, the macro risk plus the individual risks to their companies? And so entrepreneurs need to be aware that just from a time and attention standpoint, a lot of attention and mind share is going to portfolio companies. And so the reality is that it may take longer to put a round together than it would have, or it will take longer than it would have a month ago. Valuations are a bit up in the air as people are analyzing what's the opportunity. So the suggestion we're providing is, one is control what you can control, which is first look at your own cost structure in your business and where can you eke out some additional runway. And that's everything from, should you be spending money on marketing? If you are you being strategic about it, to other things that we've talked about with our portfolio. So that's number one. I think number two is exploring, if you've raised some capital and you talk to people who are interested in investing but didn't get a chance, maybe it's time to revisit those conversations and bring those people in, and being less concerned about terms right now and more concerned about cash is king. And so can you bring that capital onto the balance sheet? I think other ways of, are there opportunities to, if you're getting paid monthly, are there ways to get paid up front? Are there ways to extend your runway through customers and revenue? But the reality is that it's going to take longer to raise capital. Entrepreneurs need to be aware there's a lot of focus and time and energy around the existing portfolio, but also be aware that there's a lot of capital out there. And so the capital's there, and a lot of it is buying the time necessary to be able to go through the process and raise those funds.
Right.
One thing I would add to that is that you are reframing in some cases what you're solving for. So whereas historically you might say, if I was gearing up, for example, to raise my Series B right now or Series A, I'm thinking of the broad landscape of all VCs in the ecosystem. I'm starting with some that I've gotten to know over the past 6 months. I'm talking to my current seed investors on who they work with, and I'm building this out. That's changed for some companies, where now it is your pool of investors that you're pitching are your existing investors in some case. And because all of us, for the most part, we have reserves for our companies. And if you have a Series A investor in the mix, they probably have reserves, and you're competing for those dollars within a more finite now pool of investments. It's just the reality. So in the short term, if your cash is meaningfully less than 24 or 12 months, you're asking yourself, like, the likely pockets you're drawing from are your current VCs. And just being straight with yourself on that it kind of sharpens the mind, I think, and you know what you're solving for. Whereas we don't know if the horizon for raising new outside capital is a few months, 6 months, 12 months from now. You can't fully control that. You can today say, if to Ben's point, like, where are the pockets of cash within the business? I was on the texting last night, one of our founders at 1:55 a.m. and he's putting $250K into his business, in part to show his current VCs, like, my skin's in the game, and as part of that, hoping that it will also attract some more dollars from them with his conviction.
That's great.
One thought I would add, Aaron, as well, is we think about one of the is it's hard time. Like I say, there's going to be some companies that choose to maybe to reduce costs, including letting people go. Locals, you remember, hey, sorry, keep going.
You're good. You're good.
I didn't know if you lost me or not. Okay.
I didn't lose you.
Okay. Yeah. So it's if the company survive, it's like if you lose a few people, that sucks and it's horrible and it's a tricky environment. But the company stalls out and fails, everybody loses their job, right? So you really have to think about what's best for the most amount of people, and often the decisive actions are those that are hard in the short term, but they're good in the long term. I was just laughing. I've discovered that when my kids use the microwave, my internet goes out, and I thought they were cranking the microwave very much.
Let's just be grateful that Corona can't spread to the internet.
Yeah.
So, okay, good. All right, we've had a few questions come in. Actually, they're being texted to us by people who actually know us and are like hitting our cell phones. One of the questions that actually came up is, right now, so you're going to take some time and steady your portfolio companies. What do you think is the horizon for when VCs will start to look at companies that they haven't invested in? Do you think that's 60 days out, would you guess, or what do you think?
I took a call this morning. I mean, so those of us who, we all lived through, right, the last one operated. I was raising capital. I had a term sheet. I remember the day I'm on Sand Hill Road, Trinity Ventures had a term sheet. We get a call saying you need to cut that valuation in half because everything was unrolling in our country. And Gavin and Ben invested through that. So those of us who are most of us who've operated through this, and all the minds who can sound off will say good companies will be built through these times, period. So it behooves all of us. What the three of us are paid to do is not to manage cycles. We are paid to invest in the best assets at any given time in any cycle, and great companies will be built during this time. So, so to be clear, we will be investing. Now, you can imagine, and what I tell people is look, I've probably got 15 minutes because I want to take this in, but priorities 1, 2, 3, and 4 right now are my portfolio. And so, but the truth is I don't need to talk to my boards every single day. I mean, we may be texting every day, but we don't need to have, we have the deep dives on a regular cadence. So our bandwidth will open up in the weeks to come. And my guess is you see all of us, doing deals in the next 3 to 6. Am I out of line? Ben, Gav, are you with me there? What do you think?
I think we just lost Gavin. I guess somebody turned the microwave on. So well, hopefully he'll pop back in.
Yeah, I agree completely, Sid. We're looking at deals. We've got 2 deals under term sheet right now. We're closing those deals. And so we're going to move forward with them at the terms that
Plot the valuation in half, or are you giving them the same terms that you signed on?
We're going with it, man. I wish, yeah, maybe I need to take some lessons from Trinity, but no, we're going with it. And I, we've had some new deal calls this week. We're going to have new deal calls. We completely agree with Sid. Great companies will get funded, and some of those companies will be built around the current environment and solving problems that are relatively new problems. And so there's opportunities to build solutions around those problems. But what we're going to find in this environment, it's both with our portfolio and with companies that find funding, is that the pressing needs will continue to need to be solved, and finding the opportunities to invest in those businesses is what we're looking for. So,
Gav, so we were all wondering, was it a hot pocket? Did it taste good? Did you take a bite? Like, what happened?
Apparently no use of the microwave. It's another mysterious disruptor of internet here at the Christensen house. So
yeah, I can just see you running downstairs. Guys, turn off the microwave.
Yeah, I think everybody was video chatting at the same time, apparently.
Got it. Yes, that is definitely a case in my home right now.
Look, Ben, just one little comment on Ben's. I'm with you, and yeah, we're thinking of it similarly. The other thing to consider is this: there are some things right now that are just ignorant or stupid, like being unsafe, and we know what that is at this time. There are other things that is real courage, and if you're starting a company right now and you're hunkering down, like, that signals something. And so, we applaud it. We're going to invest in some of it. And I think on average, I think it's safe to say that the toughness, if it's the right word, I don't know if it is, of founders on average that build companies during these times skews a little higher.
Yeah, resilience, right?
And I just think you're going to have a clearer lane, right? One of the challenges in the last, 5 to 7 years has been, so much money being poured into so many competitors in so many spaces. It gets noisy and tough for customers to differentiate, and it's going to be a cleaner lane for a while. And, the metrics by which companies get measured are going to change. Efficiency is going to matter more. I think you should, one of the thoughts I had on the fundraising conversation before I, left the call was, I think you should assume that a lot of investors have been blurring the kind of deals they do. If they're late, they go earlier. If they're earlier, they go later, and they're doing a bunch of things. To the earlier conversation, assume that investors are going to go back to their core, where they feel comfy. They're going to focus a lot of their time on their portfolio, and everything's going to take longer, and they're going to focus on their core. And so I wouldn't spend a lot of time with investors that, like, for example, coastal investors that don't have a deep commitment to Utah probably aren't going to do a ton here. This is not the environment they're going to venture out. Now, if they have been doing deals here, they probably will keep doing it. But when you're out raising, just recognize that everyone's kind of returning back to their happy place during this time. And so you want to focus your attention where, you can get results.
So
arrows at the bay, man. Arrows at the coast. I like that, Gav.
Yeah, it was.
Hey, we love those
Stay
guys.
local. Stay local. No. I'm with you.
Yeah, we love those guys, but just let's shoot the arrows where they matter, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, we got a question from a founder who said, I've just taken the plunge. I just started my company. Do I forge and push forward, or do I pull the plug and try to go back to industry? What would be your advice to a really early stage founder right now?
Look,
My
there's a
quick advice.
difference.
Go ahead.
Go
Sid.
ahead, Gav.
My quick advice is, like, you know, I think this is the time. You know, starting a business in any environment is always about how much do you really care about this thing? Is there, we call it founder opportunity fit. Is this so important to you that you're willing to sacrifice deeply? And you're going to have to sacrifice more in this environment, but there's also advantages. So I think it just comes down to how bad do you want it in this environment. Now, if you were relying on capital to persuade you to you know, leave a job, that may not happen. You know, it probably won't happen in this environment. You may have to get further along. You may have to, you know, have more runway. So a lot of it comes down to the personal financial situation of that individual, which it kind of emphasizes, like, look, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, one of the key weapons you have in your toolkit is your personal balance sheet and your personal cost basis. If you got a high burn, probably isn't the time, you know. But if you've prepped and you're ready to rock, that could be an advantage you have over everybody else right now.
And look, a dollar that you earn today in your business, when things change, there's market expansion, there's revenue expansion. So if you can do it now, what I'd say is you'll be rewarded later.
Yep.
Great point. Great point. Okay, good. Let's just talk for a moment about lessons from 2008 for those that are probably under 40 years old versus those that I came out of my undergrad in 03. And so I was in Las Vegas during the downturn. Are there some lessons that came out of 08 that we should be looking to right now? Anything that beyond what we've already talked about?
You know, maybe I could just throw a couple ideas. One is, you know, I think I have in some ways it's a lot worse than 08, and in some ways it's so much better. I think there's no fundamental, you know, questions about our financial system that are where, like, hey, is everything going to go down like it felt like in 08, you know, in the summer, when you're like, man, we don't know what the future looks like, because that was purely economic, right? When we get through Corona, and unfortunately it's probably gonna be longer than we hope, but when we get through, it's like, hey, the fundamentals are there for this thing to roar, you know, and to really, you know, so those that survive are in a position to really win and win big. But I think.
Do you think the recovery will be faster than it was in?
Yeah, of course I don't know, but
Yeah,
I
no,
think in my advice to my companies, I'm assuming that we're in for a couple years of recession at least. Based on the economic lack of activity. You know, you have whole industries that are shut down right now. And if you think about it, that didn't even happen during World War II, right? There was guns that were being produced. Now there's a lot of things that are not being produced. However, I have a lot of optimism in our ability to rally from this. So we just need to get through it, and then we can rally. But one of the things that you learn in the Great Recession time, like say, and I don't think we're going back to that in Utah. So that, you know, in some ways it's like, you know, places like the Bay Area are probably going to feel very hard, but for us, it's like, hey, you know, capital has always been a little bit of a problem here, but there's more here than there ever has been, and that's not going to change. There's a lot of fresh capital, but you kind of can't rely on your customer is not investors, right? It's customers, it's revenue, right? It's a lot of returning to building business, the old-fashioned way, and that will determine who wins and loses, as opposed to who has the best pitch for investors. Trying to think what else I'd say. I mean, I just think it's back to basics from my standpoint, and I think it's and I feel like net is a lot of Utah approach to building businesses is going to shine in this environment.
Great.
I think in a community of this size where we know each other, like some of us, you know, our kids play together, we go to church together. The relationships and how you weather this, how 08, 09 was weathered, like those are the people I invest with. Those are the people I build with. Like, so So it's an opportunity. Personally, the introspection is, Sid, you go about your relationship with these founders and with these VCs in a way that we can all party in the good times, but we have all these cliches, our ride or dies. And like this is the time where you appreciate somebody putting business ahead of self, putting their check in some cases ahead of, behind, the others. And so it's an opportunity to just both invest and appreciate, the people who are playing a long game, because you don't kind of in and out of Utah, like for the most part, and outside of some of these bigger metros, like we get to build and grow together for a long time. And we'll remember this, and hopefully we look back as like, that was hard, but we're also like, and if we can do that together, like the rest is icing, is just far more enjoyable and easy.
I know it's been mentioned before, but when you look at it from an opportunistic standpoint or an optimistic standpoint, Uber, Airbnb, phenomenal companies that came out of the 2008 recession were started right in the middle of it. There will be those companies that come out of this. There will, that said, it will be harder. Harder to raise capital. It's going to be harder to find your first customer. It's going to be harder to find your second and your third customer. And so what that means is that the stronger companies will survive. So if you're that entrepreneur that is thinking about doing this, and you just stepped off the cliff, I think Gavin's points were well made. One of my mentors at one point said, look, to start a company, to go through this, you have to feel like if you don't do it, you're missing an appendage, that this matters so much to you that it's part of who you are, that you will regret it so much that you have to do it. And I think we're kind of in that environment. It's been the age of the entrepreneur recently. Entrepreneurs, everyone writes about them, everyone wants to talk about what a great thing it is to be an entrepreneur. And there's probably a lot of CEOs right now that are wishing they weren't sitting in the CEO chair having to make some of these really, really tough decisions.
Yeah.
And so there's, I think, a lot of introspection across the board and trying to figure out getting back to the fundamentals of why are we doing this, and I think this is the time when we need to remember that. Why are we doing this? Why do we care so much? And if that introspection leads you to a point where you want to keep pushing forward, then keep pushing forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It certainly.
Arian, can I throw in just one additional comment? Just one of the things that struck me in the last few weeks, we're all spending a ton of time at home and working and and managing that. And I will say one of the things I regret about how I managed myself through the last recession, I was so afraid of Kickstart failing that I just blocked everything else in my life out, and I escaped with a house and married barely and like kids who didn't know me, but like I would definitely encourage those, if many of you are sitting there saying, bring it on. This is perfect. This is what I want, which is awesome. That's what we love, you guys, but also recognize like, hey, you can take it one day at a time. Don't leave the family behind for the journey,
That's a great thought. It's a great reflection. We do have a question actually about what are your reflections from your quarantine time? And I think that's a sweet one. If you guys have any others you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'll share. I've always known I'm a bag of chemicals that I was given in this life, and I work on it. I'm hopefully gaining some self-awareness. What I didn't maybe appreciate as much as I am now is that I am a bag of chemicals who is used to a certain amount of control and who has a routine. And when you strip from me that control in some areas and you strip routine, I can devolve, and it's, you know, fortunately I've got patient partners at home, partner, my wife, and my partners here, and but it's real, like, you know, and so, and it's establishing now a different and a new normal, a new routine. But I'm a good 2 hour a day dad. I realized I'm not a great 2.5 hour a day dad, let alone like 5 hours. So it's humbling. You know, yeah.
Yeah, it's giving us a new set of challenges on every front, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I think mine are, you know, the reflection for me is there is a positive side to this, which is, you know, there's sort of a beautiful simplicity to this, which is, we have so much going on in our lives, and to have a lot of that stripped away and find, you know, here we are at the core. Um, there's been an element of that that's really fulfilling, and sort of a reminder of what matters more than anything else. It's also, I think the other side of that has made me think about, I'm very fortunate to have great partners at work, to have, you know, just a phenomenal family, and just a great situation from that standpoint. But there's a lot of people who aren't. There's a lot of people who, this is an incredibly isolating time, and I think, you know, to Sid's point, we're a community. We should find a way to help each other, and one of those ways is we should be thinking about those people that either are, you know, work for us or with us, or are part of our general community, that, you know, this is incredibly isolating, and find ways to connect with them. You know, may not be in person, probably shouldn't be at this point, but find ways to connect and bring some joy. So, but I think there's a beautiful simplicity about this if we can find it amidst all this craziness.
It's a great comment. Let's just touch for a brief moment on anything that you're seeing from your companies that you just thought was like just a brilliant take on the market, or an opportunity that they're seeing, or a way that they can pivot, or something where they're showing creativity and they're using their ingenuity to find an opportunity amidst the clouds right now, sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that, market opportunities or things that you're seeing from your companies?
You know, a couple quick thoughts on that. You know, there are some companies, especially, you know, we have a whole category of companies that I would call remote work enablers, you know, and collaboration companies. They're thriving, right? They're hitting record numbers. You know, they're enabling people to stay efficient despite the change in the workforce. And what's interesting is, you know, we're probably going to see structural change in how people work going forward. You know, it's one of the things you realize as we're all doing this. You go, wait a minute, like we live in two places at once, and each of those places is empty half the time. You know, it is a kind of a weird use of resource in our world. So those, we have a telehealth company that's killing it, of course, right now, and others. So there's some that just are naturally doing well. I think the companies that I think are poised, you know, that maybe I think most businesses are going to see a slowdown and it's going to be harder to sell. They're being flexible with customers. They're communicating. They're really, you know, asking additional questions to really build the relationships and the human connections that will help them weather this with their customers. That's what I would say. If you're not, most companies aren't going to be getting a tailwind out of this. And so I think it's more about the human connections that make it tougher for them to churn and allow you to win the deal in this tough environment.
Thinking about a few companies that we're in together, you know, some of us as VCs locally, you have, you know, Podium, who's solving for local business, saying, you know, whereas in the past, like going and getting a bite to eat at Cubby's was a lot easier. Now your ability to not only order, which we've had, but to pay for these things in a remote way and kind of soup to nuts manage all communication digitally. They've broadened and opened the platform and some of those services to extend that, which does something. It's kind of creativity as a business, but it also takes into account the broader community and the service sector in our state, that it's hard. You know, most of us, I would guess, we have siblings and at a minimum friends who are in these industries, and we don't know what the horizon looks like. And then you have education too that we're all navigating. You know, there's times where I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's just about let's keep our kids healthy. I don't know if my kids need to learn math right now, but some sense of routine in them continuing to learn is going on. And so you have groups like, you know, Pronto, another one we're invested in together, you know, to a few other companies in education who are saying, how can we enable parents at home who are not teachers by trade, who are figuring this out more easily to have their kids still, you know, learning while they're cooped up.
Yeah, what I would say is I think the companies that are looking for ways to solve the problems that both people on the consumer side and businesses on the B2B side are facing today. So your existing product, you may have been marketing a certain feature of your product. There might be another feature that is more valuable today than it was 2 weeks ago. And the companies that are adjusting to that environment and finding ways to market, you know, how can you help your customer? And how does your product help them to deal with their current problems they have today, which might have been different than they were 2 and 3 weeks ago, or 2 months ago. And that, I think, is the key. And that might also be, hey, if you're a consumer business and you don't traditionally do sales and discounts, doing a sale, doing a discount, doing something that says, hey, consumers, you know, we know times are tougher for you. We're going to give you a deal. How can, you know, so just thinking about how you can help your customer, whatever it may be in their current situation, and how your product can adjust and how your messaging can adjust. Super critical, and not easy to do, but I think those who do it well will find a path to generating some value for their customers and find that win-win situation.
Great, thank you. Great comments. We're gonna sum up now, and I just want to remind those that are on the call or on the panel, I guess you'd say, that we've recorded this so that it's available on YouTube. You can share it if you want to share it. Let's just round it out. Before I ask the final question, anything else that you feel that you want to share? Anything that if you were speaking to your own portfolio companies, you'd be sharing? That you want to kind of get out on the table before we ask the final question? Nope. All right. I'm gonna ask the question then. You know, Gavin touched on this a little bit, but we've all had some reflections as we've gone through this process. I think for most of us, the number one thing that we've thought about is our people and how we support our people. Naturally, there are going to be some layoffs, as was discussed, and we're going to have to deal with the situation as it evolves and do whatever we can to preserve what is possible to preserve, and also take advantage of the opportunities that the market presents. That being said, you know, what do you think is the attitude, the approach, the wisdom that should be shared with our teams at this time, and how are you sharing that both inside of a business context as well as at home?
I'm happy to start. Just real quickly, I mean, for me, the most important message is, you know, build a strategy to first survive, and then as that starts working for you, hopefully that's conservative, then you can set yourself up to thrive. And those that get on the other end of this tough economic environment are going to be there's going to be some big winners. It's going to be there's going to be tailwinds when we get out, because the economy is fundamentally pretty amazing underneath this crazy haze of coronavirus, which is very legit. But first off, it's definitely, let's make sure people are safe. Let's get through it. The only way to get through it is to take it very seriously right now, and then, you know, push go when we're through. But survive then thrive. And then I just, for me, a personal message of, hey, just make sure you take it a day at a time. Watch out for your own mental health, especially if we're talking to leaders on here who feel like it's all on them. It's not your fault, but you're put into a position of leadership and this is when you lead. This is when leaders distinguish themselves. This is what you will remember how you act over the next, year plus. And this will define in a lot of ways your career and your life. And so take your family and your important relationships along with you. Don't distance yourself from them during this tough time. Share your burdens, and let's get through this together. I think Utah is setting an amazing standard for the world on how to do this. Let's keep doing it.
Yeah, I would add, I think the operative word right now is accountability. There's a lot to feel and to get frenzied about, and that you realize is in fact out of your control. But foremost, personal accountability has never stared us more in the face. So for CEOs, you are the most accountable person in your company, and you can own that. And when you do, I think it's invigorating, and you know where you have control and how you can make these hard decisions. At the same time, there comes into question this notion of being a world citizen versus a business owner. What is a very close second and on the heels of personal accountability is greater mutual accountability than we have ever felt. When have any of us, other than the last month, thought about like state boards of health? Like, we don't think about that, right? And yet we are highly dependent on them acting, on good information being disseminated. And so we can expect we need to support and encourage the best. And we can see the people during these times who aren't accountable, who want to take shots. If you can go on Twitter and sit there and poke at any of these people because you have no accountability, So determine where you have the highest accountability, whether you're an inside sales rep, somebody in client success, an engineer, there is clear accountability that you have. And there is high mutual accountability. So as VCs, we have a high accountability to our LPs. We don't take it lightly. To our founders, we don't take it lightly. And we also care about the health, well-being, and livelihood of all the people who work in those companies. And so I'm looking around the community and expecting the best from people who are impacting in other ways. We don't operate in a silo, and we can't for the next little bit. And I think in embracing our own individual accountability and expecting the best from others, like, we will absolutely get through it 100%.
Yeah, I think those are very well said. And I think maybe a couple points from me as we wrap it up is, to Sid's point, this is not a time to silo. This is a time to come together. And so even as you think about your competitors, the fact is we're all in uncharted territory, as we've discussed. And we need more than any other time to come together and figure out what's working, what's not working. And each company and their in particular industry is going to have different challenges as it relates to this. And so this is not the time to be thinking, how do I kill my competitor from my perspective? This is the time to be thinking about how do we come together and figure out what's working and what's not working. And let's go back to competing, hand-to-hand combat in a year or 2 years. But I think finding ways to come together and share best practices is really important. I think the second thing is there's a quote that has always been meaningful to me by John Greenleaf Whittier, who said, of all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. And I think that applies to us in multiple ways right now. One is from a health standpoint, let's not say it might have been. Let's take our own personal accountability as leaders. Let's make sure the people that work for us and are part of our organizations are healthy and safe. And that's the number one priority. And let's not look at this and look back and say, well, if I would have done these things, things would have been different. I think now's the time to be proactive on those things. And second, from a company standpoint, a business standpoint, let's also not look back and say, hey, if I had done these 3 things, we would still be operating on the other side of this, because that's the goal. It's, as Gavin said, let's first have to figure out how to survive so that we can thrive. And so, we're all going to be making tough decisions and tough choices right now. But if I think the goal is to not be on the other side of this and looking back and saying what might have been. Let's find ways to create opportunity here by but doing some tough things now that create opportunity for us in the future.
Great, thank you. Look, I think this is a great example of us coming together and working to problem solve with each other. And I think your point about, you know, CEOs and other decision makers in the organization should feel like they can call each other and reach out to one another. I think a lot of us have had our heads down just trying to figure out how we adapt. But I'm just throwing it out there, and it sounds like you guys have done the same, that my line is open, and I want to talk to anybody that needs to bounce an idea off of somebody else, or to talk through a challenge and get somebody else's advice on it. The knowledge share right now could be our most precious and valuable thing that we can share with one another. And so we really appreciate the time that you've taken. I think our next conversation and panel of this type is likely to be on SBA loans. So if you stay tuned, those who have tuned in today, we hope to be sending out more information and get a conversation going about SBA loans. That being said, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate your engagement and your leadership in the community. So have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Arian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.